I first started learning React after years of exclusive backend and data engineering work. During the learning process, I simply wanted to fetch data from an API and render it in the markup. After searching for asynchronous data call patterns, Stack Overflow guided me to a solution that looks something like this. At the top level of a React component, there's state tracking loading, errors, and the data returned from an API. There's also a use effect that manages the request on the component mount. Even though I was a total noob at React, this pattern just didn't seem right to me. I learned about React hooks, so you can abstract much of this logic into its own isolated component, and then use it inside of another React component. This solution is a little bit better, but luckily for me, before I tried to over-engineer all my hooks, I discovered Tanstack Query, which out of the box offers everything you need to manage data calls inside of a React component. It also takes care of automatic retries on failed API calls. It offers a globally persistent data state, so you can simply invalidate cache from anywhere else in your project. And it offers dozens of other features that allow you to solve an endless number of advanced data fetching use cases. I was so impressed with Tanstack Query that I started to explore other offerings within the Tanstack ecosystem. I started learning Tanstack Router, and it felt like the best parts of framework-based file navigation had a baby with the flexibility that single-page applications offer. I was turned on to concepts that I'd never considered before, like type-safe page navigation and type-safe search parameters. I started to think critically about the application lifecycle by using route loaders that feed data into the actual React component. Tanstack Router also made me contemplate the best way to fetch data depending on different use cases by providing a seamless integration with Tanstack Query. I feel like my front-end development skills have really leveled up after using Tanstack Query and Router. But at the end of the day, Tanstack is just a compilation of libraries that help you solve problems in a really clean way. Historically, if you wanted to use Tanstack to build an end-to-end solution, you'd have to bring in your own framework or other backend solution. And that has been the case until the launch of Tanstack Start. Tanstack Start is a full-stack framework powered by Tanstack Router that works seamlessly with other Tanstack offerings like Tanstack Query. And now that Tanstack Start has an official release candidate for version 1, I'd like to go over the core features of Start so you can see for yourself why I think this will be the next goated framework. So for the remainder of this video, we're going to go over Tanstack Start server functions, middleware, server-side rendering, and for the folks that are interested in deploying to Cloudflare, we'll talk about the work that's being done to make Tanstack Start fully compatible with the Cloudflare Vite plugin. So with that being said, let's get into it by taking a look at server functions. Tanstack Start server functions allow you to define server-only logic that can be called anywhere throughout your Tanstack application. The basic syntax for server functions is very clean. You import the create server function method, define a handler, add your server-side logic, and return a result. By default, server functions are GET requests, but you can also control the method type if you'd like. You can then use server functions in a component with Tanstack Query, in a loader, or even from another server function. If a server function receives input from a client, you typically want to add an input validator. This will allow calls to your server function to be typed. You can also add extra safety by bringing in a standard schema library like Zod. Error handling is also relatively straightforward. You can simply throw errors and handle them client-side. Or, if it makes sense for your use case, you can throw specific Tanstack Router related errors, like redirect, or simply returning a not found page. Tanstack Start also offers other types of managed functions, like the create isomorphic function. This function allows you to define specific logic that is run on the server that differs from logic that is run on the browser or the client. There are server-only functions that will error out if the code is attempted to be run on the browser. And there are also client-only functions that will error out if attempted to be run on the server. This is really useful if you want to define logic that accesses the browser API. Now, my absolute favorite feature related to server functions is the ability to create a generic base server function that can power other server functions that have overlapping logic. This is especially useful when you're creating protected server functions. You can add middleware that checks if a user is authenticated, push the generic error management logic into the middleware itself, have the middleware provide context about the authenticated user, and then this information can be accessed across a grouping of protected server functions. So now this brings us to the topic of Tanstack middleware, which, like server functions, are very powerful and feature-rich. To set up middleware, import the create middleware method. The logic you define inside the server handler will be executed server-side wherever the middleware is used. Server-side middleware has access to the request object, so we can pass that into a helper function that manages authentication. We'll add some logic to check if a user is authenticated and redirect them to the login page if the user is not signed in. You can add whatever info you'd like into the context, and when a server function uses the middleware, it will have type-safe access to the content of the context. Middleware are also composable, so you can chain together different middleware instances, and the context will be passed through all the way to the server functions using said middleware. If you are creating middleware exclusively for server functions, you can implement a client handler that will run code client-side before sending the request to the server. You can then use send context if you want to push data that was collected on the client side to the server handler for further processing. Global middleware can also be created by defining middleware that you want applied to all API routes and server functions. The global middleware can then be used in the Start instance found in the start.tsx file. You may notice that there are two middleware properties, one for requests and the other for functions. This is because the function middleware is a subset of the request middleware that has extra functionality like input validation and a client handler. You'll likely use request middleware in the server handler found in the Tanstack file route. This is also where you can create and expose actual API handlers. I'd encourage you to read through the middleware documentation as there are more features that we did not cover in this video, but for the purpose of time, I think it's worth going over Tanstack Start's execution model and SSR. If you make a request to a Tanstack Start page, you'll notice that the content in the body of the web page is present in the response of the request. This is due to the fact that Tanstack Start renders pages on the server by default. What I really love about Tanstack Start is that you can easily opt in and out of server-side rendering. You can tag all your landing pages to be rendered on the server, so they'll play nicely with SEO. Then, for the actual application, if you don't have any benefit of using SSR, you can opt out and everything will be treated like a single page application. Considering that Tanstack Start is a framework powered by Tanstack Router, it's important to understand how the router behaves both on the server and the client. With SSR enabled, route loaders will execute on the server during the initial load, and then on the client during subsequent navigation, and the component will be rendered on the server. We can test this behavior by adding a log statement in a loader, and then make a request to the page. You'll notice that the logs show server-side, and the response contains rendered HTML. If we disable SSR, notice that there are no server logs, and the response contains scripts that point to the application JavaScript. You can configure a hybrid of these two behaviors by setting SSR to data only. The data loaders will follow the same pattern as SSR being enabled, but the component will be rendered on the client. The last important thing to know about SSR and Tanstack Start is that child routes inherit SSR behavior from the parent. With selective SSR, changes to the SSR configuration can only become more restrictive. So if the parent has SSR set to false, the child route will not be able to be server-side rendered. While on the topic of servers, we should also note that Tanstack Start has a new pattern for managing the server entry point. You can import the Tanstack Start entry point handler and then implement a basic fetch handler. For folks that want to deploy to Cloudflare, you can treat this file as the entry point of a Cloudflare worker and provide the path to the main property in the Wrangler config. From there, you just need to add the Cloudflare Vite plugin in the Vite config, and you'll be able to seamlessly deploy to Cloudflare. But the true unlock here is the developer experience when running locally. During local development, you'll be able to access Cloudflare resources, so your dev environment will perfectly mirror what's in production. Now, it's important to note that the Cloudflare Vite plugin is still being worked on, and they are likely a few weeks away from full compatibility with Tanstack Start. The vast majority of Tanstack Start features will work out of the box with the Vite plugin, but at the time of making this video, static pre-rendering is still being actively worked on. I am personally very excited about Tanstack Start, and I think it has the potential to be the next big framework in the years to come. So if you're interested in diving deeper, I'd suggest first start by reading through the Tanstack Router docs. I feel like 90% of Tanstack Start is just understanding the basics of Tanstack Router. Once you have a decent understanding of Router, go through the Tanstack Start docs, and then obviously play around by running some test projects locally. I have put together some resources that will help you get started much faster. I have a basic Tanstack Start on Cloudflare repo, which is set up out of the box with ShadCN, example server functions and middleware, and is pre-configured to deploy to Cloudflare. For more advanced projects, you can use my SaaS kit, which follows the same Tanstack Start setup, but it lives within a monorepo and has auth and payment patterns already built. And if you're just interested in learning how to build something end-to-end, I have a course called Full Stack on Cloudflare. This course is designed to be framework agnostic, with the core focus being how to build advanced services on Cloudflare. With that said, the UI aspect of the course doesn't use Tanstack Start, but it is built on Tanstack Router and Tanstack Query. I really hope this video helped you understand the core features of Tanstack Start, and if there are any specific aspects of Start that you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments below.